At 6:35 p.m. Eastern Time today, April 1st, 2026, 8.8 million pounds of thrust ignited at Kennedy Space Center Launch Complex 39B in Florida. The ground shook. The sky turned white, and 4 human beings left Earth heading toward the moon, the first to do so in 54 years. The spacecraft is named Integrity. The mission is called Artemis II. And as of this moment, Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen are in space. Beyond the atmosphere, solar panels deployed on a trajectory that will take them farther from Earth than any human being has ever traveled. 54 years. 2 entire generations. Every person alive under the age of 54 has never lived in a world where humans were going to the moon. Until tonight. Today we cover everything: the launch, the crew, the mission, why it took this long, and what this means for everything that comes after. Because Artemis II is not the destination, it is the opening move in something much larger. Stay with me. The launch. What just happened? Let me walk through what happened this evening precisely, because the physics of getting to the moon is not simple, and the sequence matters. The SLS, Space Launch System, is the most powerful rocket NASA has ever built. At liftoff, the twin solid rocket boosters ignited first, each one standing 177 feet tall, each generating more than 3.6 million pounds of thrust. Combined with the 4 RS-25 main engines already firing, the total force at liftoff was 8.8 million pounds. That is more thrust than any American rocket since the Saturn V that sent Apollo astronauts to the moon. The rocket cleared the tower in seconds. The solid boosters, which provide more than 75% of the thrust during the first 2 minutes, separated cleanly. The core stage continued burning. Then the core stage separated, and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage took over, carrying Orion the rest of the way to orbit. Once in orbit, the solar arrays deployed. 4 wings, each 23 feet long, 5,000 solar cells each, feeding power to the European service module built by ESA. That module is the lifeblood of the mission. It provides oxygen, water, power, and propulsion to the crew. The mission profile over the next 10 days. First, a 24-hour high Earth orbit reaching an apogee of 70,000 kilometers, during which the crew verifies every system, especially life support. Then the translunar injection burn, a precise engine firing that sends Orion toward the moon on a free return trajectory. 4 days after launch, Orion flies over the far side of the moon at approximately 8,000 kilometers altitude. Then the return to Earth, re-entry, parachutes, and splashdown in the Pacific Ocean near California. The free return trajectory is a critical safety design. It means that even if the engine fails completely, even if nothing works, orbital mechanics automatically brings the crew home. The moon's gravity and Earth's gravity do the work. This was the same trajectory Apollo 13 used in 1970 when an oxygen tank exploded mid-mission. The physics saved that crew. Artemis II uses it by design, not emergency. There was a tense moment earlier today. Engineers discovered a last-minute issue with the flight termination system, the safety mechanism that allows ground controllers to destroy the rocket if it veers off course toward a populated area. Without a cleared FTS, the rocket cannot fly. Engineers solved it by using legacy hardware from the Space Shuttle program. The countdown resumed. The launch proceeded. That detail matters, not because it was dramatic, it was resolved, but because it illustrates what this kind of mission actually is, not a smooth Hollywood launch sequence, a real engineering operation with real problems, solved in real time by real people under pressure. The crew who is on that rocket. 4 people are currently in the Orion capsule named Integrity. Let me tell you who they are, not as names on a press release, but as human beings. Reid Wiseman, 50 years old, commander. a former Navy test pilot, former commander of the International Space Station. He spent 6 months on the ISS in 2014. He has been waiting for this for years. Since losing his wife in 2020, he has been raising his 2 children alone. He acknowledged in a pre-launch interview that the excitement of this mission is sometimes tempered by the awareness of what it costs his family. He named the spacecraft Integrity. He said, "Integrity just fit everything." Victor Glover, 49 years old, pilot, a former naval aviator who flew F-18s, then became a test pilot, then an astronaut. He spent nearly 6 months on the ISS from 2020 to 2021. He is the first black astronaut to travel to the moon's vicinity, a fact that carries particular weight when you know that the Apollo program, in all its historical glory, sent 12 men to the moon's surface, and none of them were black. Christina Koch, 41 years old, mission specialist. She holds the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman. 328 consecutive days on the ISS from 2019 to 2020. She performed the first all-female spacewalk in history in 2019. She is the first woman to travel to the moon's vicinity. She could become the first woman to break the Apollo 13 distance record, 248,655 miles from Earth, depending on the exact trajectory. Jeremy Hansen, 50 years old, Mission Specialist, Canadian Space Agency, a former Canadian Air Force fighter pilot. He has never been to space before. His first spaceflight is going to the moon. He is the first non-American to travel to the moon's vicinity, making Canada the first nation other than the United States to send an astronaut beyond low Earth orbit. At the launch, NASA's first female launch director, Charlie Blackwell Thompson, addressed the crew. Reid, Victor, Christina, and Jeremy, on this historic mission you take with you the heart of this Artemis team, the daring spirit of the American people and our partners across the globe, and the hopes and dreams of a new generation. Good luck, Godspeed, Artemis II. Let's go. Why 54 years? The gap that demands an explanation. The question behind every reaction tonight is the one nobody fully answers in news coverage. Why did it take 54 years? Apollo 17 lifted off from Kennedy Space Center on December 7, 1972. It landed on the moon on December 11th. Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt spent 3 days on the surface. On December 14th, Cernan climbed back into the lunar module and said, "We leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return, with peace and hope for all mankind." He died in 2017. He never returned. Nobody returned. The answer to why starts with money and ends with political will, but the middle is more complicated. The Apollo program cost roughly $280 billion in today's money. It was not built to explore space. It was built to win a race against the Soviet Union. When Nixon was convinced the race was won, after Apollo 11, with 6 more landing missions ahead, the political justification for the cost evaporated. Apollo 18, 19, and 20 were canceled. The hardware was already built. The missions never flew. What followed was 3 decades of low Earth orbit. The space shuttle, designed to make access to space cheap and routine, became neither cheap nor routine. It never went beyond low Earth orbit. It flew 135 missions over 30 years. It cost approximately $1 billion per flight. It lost 2 crews. Columbia in 2003 ended the program's credibility as a path to the moon. Then came the Constellation program in 2004, a plan to return humans to the moon by 2020, canceled by Obama in 2010 before producing any flight hardware. Then the Space Launch System, slow, expensive, shuttle-derived, criticized relentlessly. The first SLS flight, Artemis III, happened in November 2022, 12 years after the program started. And along the way, 2 scrubbed launch attempts for Artemis II in February and March 2026, a hydrogen leak, a helium flow issue. Real engineering problems, adding months to a program already measured in decades. 54 years is not a mystery. It is the sum of every political decision, every canceled program, every budget cycle, every institutional failure, every technical problem that accumulated between December 1972 and April 2026. Tonight, that sum was overcome. What Artemis II actually tests and why it matters. I want to be precise about what this mission is and is not, because the framing changes everything about how you understand what comes next. Artemis II is not an exploration mission. It is a verification mission. Its primary purpose is to confirm that the systems required to keep 4 human beings alive in deep space actually work, with 4 human beings in them. Artemis II in 2022 carried mannequins and sensors. It validated the rocket and the trajectory. It could not validate the life support. You cannot fully simulate the physiological response of a human body to deep space radiation, to microgravity beyond low Earth orbit, to the psychological pressure of being 230,000 miles from Earth without putting a human being there. So Artemis II is doing exactly that. Each astronaut wears a dosimeter measuring radiation exposure. Multiple sensors throughout the Orion capsule measure radiation penetration through the hull material. The crew collects saliva samples throughout the mission for immune system analysis. Before and after, they undergo blood tests, psychological evaluations, eye movement tests, balance tests. The mission also includes a proximity operations demonstration. The crew manually maneuvers Orion relative to the spent upper stage using the European Service Module's engines. This tests the manual control capability that will be essential when Orion needs to dock with the Gateway Lunar Space Station or approach a lunar lander in future missions. If Integrity and its crew return safely in 10 days, NASA will have verified every system needed for the next step. And the next step is where this gets serious. What comes after? The road to the Moon and Mars. Artemis III is currently scheduled for next year, 2027. It will not land on the Moon. The mission profile was recently revised. Artemis III will send a crew into low Earth orbit to test integrated operations between the Orion spacecraft and the commercial lunar landers, SpaceX's Starship HLS and Blue Origin's Blue Moon. It is a systems integration test before the actual landing. Artemis IV, currently targeted for 2028, will be the first crewed lunar landing since Apollo 17. 2 astronauts will descend to the lunar South Pole. The South Pole was chosen because of the confirmed presence of water ice in permanently shadowed craters. Water ice means oxygen for breathing, hydrogen for fuel, and a resource that could make a permanent lunar base viable. That permanent lunar base is not a distant dream. It is a funded program. The Lunar Gateway, a small space station in lunar orbit, built with international partners including ESA, JAXA, and CSA, will serve as a staging point for surface missions. NASA's stated goal is an enduring human presence on the Moon, astronauts living and working on the surface for weeks at a time, not just brief visits. And beyond the Moon, Mars. The timeline for a crewed Mars mission sits somewhere between 2035 and 2040 in NASA's current planning. SpaceX has been more aggressive, targeting the early 2030s. The path runs through everything Artemis is building: the deep space life support systems, the radiation data, the long-duration habitation experience, the operational protocols for crews far from Earth. Every day of data from Artemis II feeds that Mars timeline. Every problem solved on Orion reduces the risk on whatever system eventually makes the 8-month transit to Mars. Every lesson from the moon informs the design of whatever humans will need to survive on a planet 140 million miles away. Artemis II is not about the moon is the practice run. At 6:35 p.m. Eastern Time today, 4 human beings left Earth heading toward the moon, the first to do so since December 1972. The spacecraft is named Integrity. It carries a commander who is raising his children alone, a pilot who is the first of his background to make this journey, the first woman to travel this far from Earth, and a Canadian whose first spaceflight is heading toward the moon. In 10 days, if everything goes right, they come home, and then the work continues. Artemis III, the lunar South Pole, a base on the moon, Mars. Eugene Cernan left the moon in 1972 and said we would return with peace and hope for all mankind. Tonight, 54 years later, we started keeping that promise. Subscribe to follow every update from the Artemis II mission over the next 10 days. The translunar injection burn, the lunar flyby, the return, the splashdown. We are covering all of it. And tell me in the comments, where were you when you watched the launch tonight? Because some moments deserve to be remembered.